Ooh, Welcome to our Bylaws and Open Meetings Law workshop. We'll be starting in a couple minutes, and if you could just put your name and CEC if you're on a CEC or district or neighborhood in the chat, and your pronouns if you'd like, and we'll be starting soon. I think I was muted when I just said something. For those of you who just came in, just if you could put your name and your neighborhood or CEC or district in the chat. Um, and we'll be starting in a minute. Okay, I think we should get started. Um, Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jonathan Greenberg. I am on the board of the ECC, and I was a member of the CEC in District 30 for 6 years. And during that time, I served as president for 1 year and also for our bylaws committee as our bylaws committee chair for another year or two. Um, and this is part of a series of workshops that the ECC is doing to help especially CEC members um, to understand and to be empowered by various aspects of CECs. This is, not an easy job to as a volunteer to have. As I said, I was on CEC for 6 years, and I felt like right until the very end, I was learning new things all the time. So even if you're not new on a CEC, I think having a refresher about bylaws and open meetings law is always useful. Um, and I'll say we've had a couple new people come in, so if you could just put your name and your CEC or district or neighborhood in the chat, um, and we will get started. Okay, so first, just an introduction about the ECC. Who is the ECC? The Education Council Consortium is a grassroots organization of parents, caregivers, educators, and advocates. Our mission is to develop and support New York City public school parent leadership through education, networking, and organizing. We empower historically marginalized New York City public non-charter school parents to become advocates and change agents at the systems level. Okay, today's workshop is about bylaws, which is not the most exciting topic, but it's a really important one. And I hope one of my goals here is to kind of talk a little bit about the ways in which bylaws can really help your council to function better and also to help you as a member to to get more done on your council. So we're going to cover how and why to write bylaws for citywide and community education councils and how to follow New York State open meetings law. And these topics are very much interconnected. That is why we're doing them together. Um, you'll notice if you read bylaws of existing councils or the template that the DOE puts out that there is a lot about following open meetings law in CEC and citywide council bylaws. And we'll get into that as we go. Okay, before we begin, we already did that. Put your name in the chat. Legal disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. End of legal disclaimer. Um, well, just to say, I may get things wrong. And there certainly may be questions that neither I nor anyone else in the room can answer. And if that's the case, we can reach out to other folks who we know who are lawyers. We can always reach out to Face and see what they say. Um, but this is not, this is, the bylaws are a legal document, but I'm not able to give legal advice. Okay. Bylaws are the internal rules for running a council or any organization, really. Um, I think one useful way of thinking about bylaws are they are rules and procedures that cannot be changed without formal procedure and vote. So this is a good way to decide what you would like to put in your bylaws as a council and what you might want to leave out, because there are many things that you might want more flexibility about. Bylaws, in order to change bylaws, they need to be presented at two meetings of your council and voted on by the whole council. That means that changing bylaws takes some effort and time. And there are other things that you might not want to have to put through that, go through that effort to change. You might want more flexibility. Okay, so here's some general advice about bylaws. Um, Bylaws, as I said, are a legal document. Language should be clear and precise. Many of us are not used to working with legal documents. We're not used to thinking about language this way, but if the language is not precise, it opens it up to people misreading it and sometimes intentionally misreading it. So it's really important that we're precise with any language that's in the bylaws. Bylaws should not contradict laws or regulations. Most importantly, state law and chancellor's regulations. So these are the laws mostly that we're talking about when we're thinking about what our bylaws should not contradict: the New York State education law, the public officers law, and which is the open meetings law, and the FOIL law, the which is the ability um, to um, to ask for any data or information related to the governance of New York City or New York State, and the law of general construction and chancellor's regulation D-140 to D-170. Um, even though, oh, so what one thing you'll notice with bylaws is that they actually repeat a lot of information that is in these very laws that we just talked about. So there is a lot that is both in chancellor's regulation and in CEC bylaws. It doesn't have to be, because the chancellor's regulation always takes precedence, and so does the state law takes precedence over that. But it is very useful to have all of the relevant information in one document, and to the best you can, make that document uh, as accessible to your members and to the public as possible. So even if what you're doing is kind of piecing together for a lot of your bylaws, piecing together bits from state state law and chancellor's regulations, I think it is still a really, really useful document because it puts it all in one place, and nobody but the most diehard, you know, uh, people are going to actually look through the state laws to find all the relevant statutes that apply to CECs. And I should say a lot of this has been done for us by the DOE in creating by creating a template for us, but also by previous councils who have now for years and years been adding to and changing their bylaws. And of course, councils are always free to make their bylaws go further than existing laws and regulations. You just have to be able to meet the existing laws and regulations. So, some examples to look to if you want to overhaul or edit or you know change your bylaws. There is a DOE template. It is in the CCEC manual that FACE gave to all um, members at the orientation. Um, I can share that manual with anyone if they don't have it. If you're not a CEC member, I'm happy to share that with you at the end of the workshop. Just remind me. Um, that template is important. Um, that template is something that we know that the DOE and their legal department has vetted. Um, we do not have to stick to the template, but when you deviate from that template, and you should, because every council is going to work differently, but when you do, you just have to be careful, because you be careful of um, tripping up on things that the DOE may not agree with or may not like if something came to a head. So the other good example to always take is other councils' bylaws. And when I was the bylaws chair of CEC 30, I would look to see what other councils had in their bylaws on any specific topic, compare ours to them, and see how we can improve our bylaws. Okay, so this is the template. Um, these are the sections in the template. I'm just going to go through this quickly. We're not going to talk about all of these sections, but this is the sections that the DOE believes are necessary or useful for councils to have in their bylaws. So first, the name of the council and its mission or what it has authority to do. This seems this can seem unnecessary until you're on a council for long enough and you realize that people have been referring to your council in different ways, in three different ways: community district education council, community education council, you know, district 30 community education council, community education council, district 30. And sometimes it's useful to have in your bylaws a way to standardize that, whether that is for your communications, for your branding, for what have you. And that's something that you can do in your bylaws. Officers and elections. Which officers are you going to have? I believe the only mandatory officer on CECs is the president, and the many of the other officers uh, are common to most, if not all, CECs: a vice president, a treasurer, a secretary. But CECs are free to change up that structure if they feel like something else might work better. Meetings. When are meetings going to happen? We are required to have calendar meetings once a month that include this superintendent. But of course, we're free to have them more than once a month. But this is another example of something that I would say, you know, be very careful if you put two meetings a month in your bylaws and you wanted to skip a meeting, you would require 2 months in advance, potentially, to discuss that change in meetings and vote on it. That might be overly restrictive. Um, you have to have one meeting a month, so it makes sense to have that meeting in your bylaws. And of course, you can mention additional meetings there without committing yourselves to doing that. Conduct of business at meetings is the order of what happens in your meetings. The do you have how many public comment sessions? What comes first, and so forth. Um, this is this is an example of something that I think is very useful to discuss with your council, because sometimes when you look at a council's bylaws, you see an order of business that has been there for many, many years and may not be followed, or people might think, yeah, we don't really like the order that we're doing these things. We've just been doing it the same way for many years. You're completely free to change this, and sometimes it's very beneficial to do so. On CEC 30, we added a second public comment section. So now CEC 30 has one at the very beginning of the meeting and one at the end, and we put that in our bylaws. And we also put in our bylaws that we were to have public speaking sessions after each resolution, which is something that we did not do in the past. Committees. What committees are you going to have? And I should say, what standing committees are you going to have? Which is to say, what committees do you think are necessary for the year-to-year functioning of your council? You can also form ad hoc committees, and you can mention those in your bylaws, but you don't need to name what they are if they're only ad hoc committees. You're free to create and dissolve committees as the council wishes. Parent associations and community involvement. This is something that is in state law, and there are connections and engagement that the CEC is meant to have with their district. And this is a good way to remind the council that this is part of your duty. Vacancies on the council is usually largely a repetition of what is in the state law, which is, by the way, uh, again repeated in chancellor's regulations. What happens when a council member has a certain number of unexcused absences? What is grounds for removal based on vacancies? How are members meant to communicate those vacancies to the council? Um, Very important to have guidelines for how to amend the bylaws. Um, Parliamentary authority and compliance. There's usually something about Robert's Rules of Order here. Um, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And a member's code of conduct, which is something that some councils have been adding to their bylaws in recent years. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple minutes. Are there any questions before we move to get into more detail on a few of these topics? You could just raise your hand or come off mute if you have any questions. Yes, Robert.
Hey, how are you doing? A quick
Good.
question. So, the president is the only mandatory officer. Everything else is extra. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, and but my fellow ECC members, if I'm missing this, I'm pretty sure that this is right. Um, it's It's not mandatory, but it's been customary for most councils for many years. So,
And that's so different from a PTA, which is a 501c3, where you have to have the three entities, president, treasurer, and secretary. So this is
correct.
just different. And so this explains why the president has this absolute power on the CEC somewhere, and everybody just added on.
Um, well, the president shouldn't have absolute power. And that is, something that, we can sort of talk about that. It is why the president has certain responsibilities on councils. But when we see presidents who seem like they're taking more power than simply the running of the council and the really what is essentially an executive sort of administrative function. That seems to be an issue. And I know, Robert, you had some issues when you were on your council, but
Yeah. No, we can get into that later. It's just, just as an example, a response to a resolution doesn't get forwarded unless, the president decides to forward it, stuff like that. That's what I meant by
yeah,
power. But anyway, I just want to clarify this very interesting point that you made. Thank you.
yeah, sure, Lourdes.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. In regards to the again the section that you spoke about changing the bylaws in regards to the executive board or whatever you want to call it, the president and so on and so forth. Um, how do we specifically, how far can we go specifically to the changes? As of the president, in the case of specifically in the case of an interacting president that's been sitting for a while, and not everybody in the council is necessarily in agreement with this person, and there's certain changes that needs to be to that wants to be done within our bylaws. How do we specifically change any of that when a template was given to us with specific wording and so on and so forth? I mean, do we contact legal? Do we ask you guys to come and support so that specifically our council can share what it is that the what it's the concerns and what is it that we would like to put in the bylaws and so on and so forth?
That's I think that is in some ways a that's it's a difficult situation because the bylaws are themselves a an expression of the will and ideas of the council itself. So in order to change the bylaws, you have to have a majority of the council who agrees to particular changes. I know that councils have different mechanisms for changing their bylaws, which, as I said, are usually in the bylaws. On CEC 30, we had a bylaws committee, and so we would discuss changes, and then we would bring those proposed changes to the full council for discussion over two calendar meetings. Um, but as to how to how to get people on board with those changes, that's more of a political question within your council than it is a a, a question about how the bylaws work. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts about that, about Lourdes's question. Feel free to raise your hand, or speak up. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, at the end, Lourdes. I'm going to move on with our presentation here. So as I mentioned, a lot of what's in the is in the template, and a lot of what's in bylaws is taken directly from state law and chancellor's regulations. Some of that you really can't change, or you can change, but you're taking a big risk because you're really going against the law. And if somebody were to complain, you might be in a bad situation. Um, but here are some places that councils do have freedom to change their bylaws. So as I mentioned, the order of business at meetings. Um, you really have a lot of control over what your meetings are like. What kinds of things do you do in your calendar meetings versus in the business meeting? I know that there's really there's some real variation across the city as to, are the president's reports in the calendar meeting? Are they in the business meeting? What kind of discussions are you going to have in one versus the other? By relegating something to the business meeting, it means that many fewer community members are probably going to see that discussion and be part of it. So you really have a lot of control over what your meetings are like. How can you make your meetings most welcoming and accessible to your community? And how can you get your business done? Um, Public speaking guidelines. How long are you going to give people to speak? Are you going to allow, if somebody has a question in public speaking, are you going to allow the superintendent or council members to answer that question, or are you going to save that until another part of the meeting? Um, how formal are these sessions going to be? This again, there's really variation from council to council here, and you have control over what these things are like. If you feel like your council's meetings are not working as well as they might, this might be a place to start to think about, what can we do to change our the order of business at our meetings, or the public speaking guidelines to help people feel more welcome. Uh, One thing that's a little bit tricky, but I really think might be useful, is sort of further guidance on removals. There is the language from state law that says these are the grounds for an excused absence, but many councils still find it difficult to um, to determine that somebody's absence is excused or not. And so I think there might be a place to sort of give further guidance on that issue, more examples perhaps. Um, the deadlines for the draft minutes, when the recording should be posted, and other documents associated with meetings. Those are really up to the council. Um, Standing committees. What committees do you think should be in your bylaws? What committees really are you going to have every term, and you really need to have them? On CEC 30, the zoning committee was always a standing committee. The bylaws committee was always a standing committee. And we might have had a couple of others. But then when we had other committees that might have been convened for specific purposes, and then dissolved. And those other committees, those ad hoc committees, how are they formed? You know, what are the grounds for having a committee, a new committee, and what does the council need to do to form that committee? Um, another another important area where councils have some freedom is how committee chairs are appointed. Usually they are appointed by the president, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think it's really important that councils are at least aware of the bylaws and that there is a process for updating them so that everybody feels like they were present when these bylaws were created. Um, I've seen cases where people are upset because the president gets to appoint committee chairs without, a vote, let's say. But this is something that, in those cases, is usually in the bylaws and was decided collectively by the council, not by the president, that this is how it was going to work. And of course, a code of conduct, which I'll say the DOE had a code of conduct in its prior template and has now removed that. So if you as a council would like to have a code of conduct, which I think is a good idea for many councils, that is something that you will not be able to get from the template, although we can circulate the 2023 template to get some ideas, and I'll talk about why they took that away in a bit. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. Code of conduct. Um, so the state law does not give rules for conduct in organizations and boards like CECs. Um, and however, the reason why some CECs have been writing codes of conduct is because it can really help create a healthier environment for members, uh, and a more welcoming environment for the public. We have had um, recently, and also, frankly, for the 3 years in which CECs have been in existence, we have had our share of conflict on our CECs, and some of that conflict I think is healthy. We are working out how we want to advise the DOE, how we want to vote on decisions like voting decisions, what kinds of resolutions we want to send out into the world. And if there is conflict, it is, I think, not a bad thing for councils to be able to work that out. However, when that conflict devolves into abusive, sometimes racist, or really um, unsavory discussions, and that has certainly happened. Um, it really doesn't do it. It's not good for the council, and it makes it more difficult for the council to get work done and more difficult for it to welcome its community into its meeting and into its orbit. Um, so the reason why the DOE took out the the code of conduct from its template is because there was a lawsuit against a Chancellor's Regulation D210, which was a anti which is a regulation that prohibits the harassment of CEC members and other parent leaders. And the because of the lawsuit that was filed, much of that chancellor's regulation has been repealed. And so there are real limits on how the DOE can enforce violations of a council's code of conduct. The council can enforce its own code of conduct up until a point. And here I really I don't want to say things that I'm not I can't back up, but I do believe that a council can censure a member, um, and what I don't know is whether a council could temporarily suspend a member, which was something that in the previous template code of conduct, the DOE suggested was something that could go into this code of conduct. Oh, one more thing I want to say about a code of conduct is that uh, even if certain aspects of the code of conduct are not enforceable, it can still be a meaningful part of your bylaws. Um, and this is because it is something that you create together as a council. And the process of creating a code of conduct and reviewing a code of conduct is itself, I think, a potentially good way to prevent people from violating that code of conduct. Okay, Robert's rules. So Robert's rules of order are really important for running meetings for many councils and many organizations in general. Um, they are rules for running meetings in general and not running an organization. Um, they are basically the sort of the rules for parliamentary procedure that most organizations are most commonly followed in the United States. Councils do not have to use Robert's rules. You could decide as a council to have a different set of rules for running meetings. I would advise to just be very careful about that because one of the really beneficial things about Robert's rules is that they have rules about all kinds of situations that you may not realize are going to come up and ways to perhaps mediate issues or to head off conflict or how things are supposed to be done in a way that will protect you from people accusing you of running your meeting in a unfair or closed manner. And so unless you really have a good set of rules and ideas that you would like to use instead of Robert's rules, I would advise you to use Robert's rules, and then you have a whole book to consult with. And it's also something that FACE and the DOE are familiar with. And there are many others who could help in that case. Um, they're and this I've kind of said this, but they're useful as a gap filler. So, your bylaws are only going to cover so much, and um, they're even though everything, the law, bylaws, and council practice take precedence over Robert's rules, there will be things that come up that nobody thought of. And it's useful to have Robert's Rules of Order. And there's a few different editions of Robert's Rules of Order. There's like a short one that I have that I never really needed anything more detailed than the I can't remember what it's called. Like it's a pretty concise, might be even called concise. I can find that and send that around. Okay, so the last couple slides are about open meetings law, and then we can open this up and uh you know have more of a discussion. And as I said in the beginning, open meetings law is really connected to bylaws. If you read through bylaws, a lot of what's there is actually from the open meetings law. And I think that and I know that the ECC in general has always been a big proponent of open meetings law, and I for one am very glad that that we have this law to keep the business of our CECs transparent and open to the public. So this first slide has things from open meetings law that have been true for a long time, far before the pandemic and far before we as CECs were able to have virtual or hybrid meetings. Um, Almost all of these things are things that go into bylaws. Um, so this is just, the kind of like high level, most important points of open meetings law that CECs really need to pay attention to. Um, CECs must announce meetings publicly 1 week in advance and post the meeting agenda 72 hours in advance. This is actually in state law, and I don't think it's in the 1 week part. I don't think is in the template. But this is what the open meetings law says. So, and I want to read this passage from the from the bylaws template, which is basically taking stuff from state law because it really it kind of gets into a level of detail that I think we forget about and that is not really always followed. And I just also want to mention that school leadership teams are also subject to open meetings law. So all of these things that we talk about apply exactly in the same way to school leadership teams. So so meetings should be announced through local news media and conspicuously posted in one or more designated public places as provided by the open meetings law. The open meetings law requires that public business be performed in an open and public manner which the community be fully aware of and able to observe the performance of public officials and attend and listen to their deliberations and decisions. So the DOE has really been very lax on even communicating the requirement for CECs and SLTs to post the announcements of all of their meetings in public places and through the news media. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because they're not going to keep us, honest on this, but we can keep us ourselves in line with these regulations. Meeting minutes must be publicly available within 2 weeks. Okay, so I'm contradicting something that I said earlier in the presentation, which says you can decide when your meeting minutes are posted. This is usually what this usually means for our purposes is a draft of the minutes must be publicly available within 2 weeks. Meetings must be in an accessible location. That means you cannot have meetings in schools that are not accessible for people with disabilities. And council business can can take place only at public meetings. This is often tricky, but you cannot um, go to a restaurant with a bunch of your council members and write a resolution and discuss the benefits or pros and cons of a certain topic with them. That really needs to be done in a public manner and is meant to be done in public meetings. And open meetings law designates what the criteria are for going into executive session. And if anyone doesn't know what executive session is, it is a private session that a public body has. So what happens is a council, if you meet the requirement for going into executive session, then you would perhaps go into another room and close the door so that the members of the public cannot hear what they're saying. Some of the criteria are, for instance, just discussing personnel decisions like hiring or firing. Um, and there's a whole list of these kinds of things. But the open meetings law lays out what the criteria need to be to go into executive session. This is really important because we do not want councils going into executive session when they simply don't want the public to hear what they're saying. Okay, so open meetings law, this is the second uh, part of it. And these are the new parts of the open meetings law, which was revised a few years ago in light of what had happened during the COVID pandemic and the changes that were happening across the state in how public bodies uh, run their meetings and their business. So what they did is essentially allowed for a kind of hybrid meeting. What they said is members must be in person according to open meetings law, unless members of the public body, okay, they said members of the public body shall be physically present at any such meeting unless such member is unable to be physically present at any such meeting location due to extraordinary circumstances as set forth in the resolution, the res which is a resolution that the council would pass, and written procedures adopted pursuant to paragraphs A and B of this subdivision, including disability, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or any other significant or unexpected factor or event which precludes the member's physical attendance at such meeting. So essentially, you need to write into a resolution, which we'll talk about in a moment, what the why somebody would be able to be remote. And to be perfectly, frank about this, uh, nobody is really going to check. Um, but the but this is what the law says. They did not want to simply say, oh, you can have hybrid meetings. What they said is you can have a hybrid meeting if there are extraordinary circumstances, and then they sort of left it up to councils to define what those circumstances are. Um, so this means that to have a hybrid meeting, there must be an in-person quorum. It means you must have 7 members for a CEC who are physically in person. The councils must have passed a resolution that says we are allowed to have a hybrid meeting, and here are the procedures for doing so. There are many councils have passed these, and so if your council has not done so, um, we can we can direct you to examples of this resolution. In fact, there are examples of this resolution in our resolution bank, which is on the CEC website, the ECC website. And cameras must be on during the whole meeting. And in order to have hybrid meetings, the council must maintain a website with meeting links and recordings. And that is the end of the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for discussion or questions. I haven't been checking the chat, so maybe if someone else
There's been a lot
has.
of discussion, but Gavin has his hand up. So
Okay, Gavin, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. This is really informative and helpful. I keep poring over our CEC bylaws and trying to kind of navigate it. One question I have is so we're one of the few CECs I think that does not permit hybrid meetings at all. So I would love to revise our rules so we could do hybrid meetings. And so I know we need a resolution. And I have the template for that. But do we also need to revise the bylaws? And so I guess I'm wondering what's sort of the timeline for that? Because I know to revise the bylaws, we need like basically 2 meetings. We put the bylaw revision, up, we post it publicly, we discuss it. The following month, we vote on it. And then the resolution would come when? As part of amending the bylaws? I'm just trying to get like a roadmap for how do I get from point A where we are now to point B, which is, having the hybrid meetings.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. That I remember having that same question when we amended our bylaws and passed the resolution. If you have support on your council, this is logistically a little bit weird, but it's not that hard. The thing that takes longest is amending the bylaws. So what I would do is start the process of amending the bylaws, and then on the second calendar meeting, when you have voted to amend those bylaws, then you can introduce a resolution and pass that, and then you'll be all set. It doesn't really matter the order. But that would be my suggestion.
So I could just follow up. So for example, if we have a meeting in September, we put up the bylaws amendment for the September meeting. It's on our agenda. We talk about it. And then October, we do two things. We vote on the bylaws amendment, but we also vote on the resolution in October. And then November, we're good to go with hybrid meetings.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I would probably make, when you introduce the bylaws amendment in September, I would make it clear that it's contingent upon the resolution passing. Right? You're preparing for changing the bylaws, but bylaws won't be changed unless the resolution to do hybrid passes. So just so people are clear.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that one would pass without the other because it's the same
Right,
quorum
right.
that's
It's just
voting
one
on
takes
both.
2 months and the
Exactly.
other doesn't. So,
Yeah.
but I think, just so that people don't assume that you're jumping the gun, I think you just want to make it clear that you're doing this way so that you can save time.
And I should introduce you, Shino. I mean, you've been introduced in the chat, but Shino is also a member of the ECC board, very long time CEC member in District 2, um, uh, and here with me. And I also have, I think, Erica Kendall.
She was, but she had to go to her
Uh,
CEC
yeah,
meeting. Yeah, and
and
Nikwan is here.
yeah, and Naquan, who are fellow board members. Okay, next question, Avi. Oh, okay. It looks like you put your hand down. Teresa.
Oh, hi. I don't know if you can answer this, but I'd like, if you can, I'd like this clarified. Uh, for example, you have a quorum. The citywide I'm on is six people, but you have three people who are not in person. They're remotely present. So there's something that has to be voted on, a resolution. Can the people who are not in person vote and have it be counted?
Yes, they can vote and have it be counted if you have done all the things to allow your council to have hybrid meetings. Then the remote members' votes do count. However, they only count if you have a quorum in person.
Yes. Oh,
Yes,
absolutely. Yes, yes. Okay,
yes.
because I get different information about that. So this is definitely they can vote.
Definitely. And that is really sort of the heart of what hybrid means in that case, is that you can still conduct your business, which is to say to vote on things democratically, even if some of your members are not there in person.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a
Sure.
lot.
Teresa, could you repeat that question? Because I didn't understand it the way. Repeat that question.
Okay, you're supposed to have quorum, right? You have three members. You have six members who are there. That's quorum. Then you have three other members who are not in person, but there's a vote, and they all vote. everybody votes. Is that okay? Can a person who was not there in person have a vote and have it be valid? Is that, am I?
Yeah, no, I just needed you to repeat it because I didn't. That's not what I heard the first time. I thought it was 6 people that were not there. Okay, yep. All right, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Teresa. Okay, Ashley
Sure.
is next.
Hi, so I do have a question about if a person creates a reso, is there a certain time frame that it should be shared? Or is like can someone just create a reso and add it into the CC agenda and then just say I'm going to share this during our CC meeting, but it was never on the agenda. Families don't know anything about it. And it was literally just given to us this week. And the meeting is tomorrow. So, is there like a timestamp or, should it be sent out to families? Like, is that something mandatory? Is that something that's just only what the president wants? Like, uh, I don't know if that makes sense.
That that makes sense. I think that has been unfortunately a very common abuse of power from certain CECs.
Yes.
Um, so this is what the bylaws really needs to do. It needs to lay out, look at your bylaws, see what it says. How many days or how many hours does somebody need to uh, introduce a resolution in order for it to be put on the next calendar meeting? And it absolutely should be sent out publicly. I mean, I would say it should be at least a few days and should be sent out publicly at least a few days in advance so that members of the public are aware. And if they're interested in that resolution, they can come and they can discuss it. They can argue against it or for it or whatever. But if you introduce a resolution the same day, then people do not have the opportunity to do that. That is, in my mind, that's really in violation of open meetings law. However, unfortunately, councils, you know, if councils agreed to change their well, actually, I don't know. That now that I think about it, um, you know, so the meeting agenda needs to be posted 72 hours in advance. Um, could the bylaws say that you could add a Probably they could say that you could add an agenda after that time and send that out one day in advance if you wanted to. I will say that most councils do have on in their bylaws a provision that allows people to basically introduce a resolution at the meeting. And in order for that resolution to go on the agenda at the meeting, a majority of the council members need to agree. So that's a little bit different than the normal procedures, which are if you have two co-sponsors, three people can sponsor something and it can get it on the agenda. And that's usually like 3 days in advance. Um, but yeah, Ashley, it doesn't sound like they're doing the right thing.
I'm not happy with what I'm stepping into. So I just want to make sure I have the clarity of that because this is something that is coming up right now. A notice for our general meeting was sent out yesterday morning. And then the president sent out his reso about an hour or two afterwards yesterday. And then there was no discussion about it. It was very fast, quickly done, and then was just shared with us via email. However, on the back end of that, then we are told as the regular rest of the council that we're not even allowed to conduct business via email or in a chat or anything, but then he's sending out the reso via email and then basically asking for input. So it's kind of uh, how do you say kind of a little backwards. You're asking no business to be conducted, but then you're conducting business, is picking and choosing what's accommodating for this person. And like I said, it's not really giving us as the rest of the council time enough to review the reso and really see if there's something maybe we want to add or edit or whatever the case might be. Keeping in mind that not every person on the council is a stay-at-home parent. They don't have
Yep.
time to sit there during the day and really go through an email of a reso that's like 4 pages long. Myself, I know I can say this for a lot of parents, we do a lot of our stuff in the evening time because our kids are up during the day, they're active during the day, and we a lot of times wait until they're sleeping. That's our downtime. And I know, I get it. I see you pointing, I get it. So it's just a matter of being accommodating to the whole council, but just us knowing what we should do in these situations, because I feel like honestly, if it wasn't for this session right now, like I wouldn't know the do's and don'ts on this, so to speak. It's not very transparent or honestly shared in CEC1, unfortunately. So I just want to make sure that, I go into this as well as um, other members who are probably struggling with this or who are on the same council as me, um, to just know like what we're really like going into, so to speak. Um, it's
Yeah.
just it's very messy.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just mentioned the council you're on, so now I have a little bit more
Yeah.
context. But
Yeah.
but
Oh,
but
trust me. Anytime I say CC1, everyone looks at me. Oh, I'm like, yeah,
well,
yes.
what I will say, I mean, more generally for everybody else as well, is that the way that councils operate is in part a product of their bylaws, and it's also in part a part of a culture and um uh the way that people have been doing things for a long time. And if people have been introducing resolutions the day before and nobody said anything and it's just nobody really polices them, they may not be really be even thinking about it. So in your case, that may not be true, but I wanted to just say, like, if this is the case on your council, and what I would say the best thing to do would be to perhaps, you know, raise it in a business meeting, um, and start to get a sense, or even have an offline conversation with people. Try to get a sense of whether of something like this is intentional to try to, skirt the regulations that are meant to make things transparent, or it's just the way they've been doing it for years and years. Because you don't want to pick fights with people unnecessarily. Um,
Let me just chime in about email communication. It is permissible, but it's a little bit nuanced, right? You don't want to be discussing the substance of your resolution necessarily with everybody on your council on your email, because that is actually discussing the real business that should be discussed publicly. But you are allowed to communicate with all your members in one email, because as far as the open meetings law goes, the communication has to be simultaneous, meaning everybody has to be communicating at the same time, which email by nature is not. You read your email at 6 p.m., somebody else reads it at 8:30 p.m., somebody else reads it the next morning. That time difference makes email communication non-simultaneous, which makes it okay. And that's at least the explanation I got from the Committee on Open Government when I inquired about this. So somebody put it in the chat and we'll be sharing it with email afterwards. But Committee on the Open Government is a great resource. When you have this kind of question, you can reach out to them and explain what the issues are, and they will render their opinion. It's advisory, so it's not like a legal advice, but they're the experts on open meetings law, and they'll tell you what their opinion is on what you're asking. So let's say, can the president introduce a resolution on a Friday evening after the agenda went out? Is that in keeping with the open meetings law, yada, yada, yada? They will let you know what their opinion of that particular action is. So you should definitely take advantage of that office.
Yes, to Gavin's comment in the chat, best practices for hybrid meetings. This is tricky. I mean, it's something that we can definitely think about. It's tricky because there is really a wide range of both physical situations as far as where people have their meetings and technological situations. What equipment do CECs have? What kind of technical uh, ability do they have? Um, because I mean, if you ask me, it's really unfair that CECs, in order to have hybrid meetings, need to basically do all the setup, the technical setup themselves. It is way too much to be asking a council, but that's the reality right now. And because of that, there really isn't a one size fits all solution. But we'll think about it. Um, One other thing I wanted to say about resolutions and announcements is that uh, I guarantee you that in the course of a 2-year term on the CEC, that something will come up that seems really urgent, and there is a temptation to introduce something at the last minute. And sometimes you may actually decide to introduce it at the meeting and, take a roll call vote to decide whether the resolution is. But I just urge you to think very hard about whether it is that important that it needs to be put on this month's agenda, if it's like the day before or a couple days before, or if it might actually be better to wait another month and give people perhaps a couple weeks notice to see the resolution and to plan their time to come out and to comment on it. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the comments in the chat, but if there's anything that you put in the chat that you would really like to be answered or discussed, live here, um,
Can I just add one
yeah,
thing about email communication, which I
yeah.
forgot to say? Your email communication is foilable. So be careful what you put in your email. And even if you are allowed to communicate using email with your full council, just be careful what you're putting in there. Because if you start talking about the substance of the resolution, that could be a violation of the open meetings law. If you're talking about the mechanics of the resolution, like you put a resolution out there, say, who wants to co-sponsor with me? That's permissible. But if you start editing it with the whole council, that's probably in violation. So do know that somebody can foil your emails, Freedom of Information Act. And even if you're using your personal email address, if you're using that personal email address for council business, you will have to disclose all the emails. So just remember that.
Oh, just right. And I'll just repeat as I said in the beginning, um, this stuff is complicated, and if you are involved in any way with updating your council's bylaws, you know, reach out for advice or help. If you're on the ECC listserv, um, that's a good place to ask if you have specific questions. Face, it's worth, reaching out to Face, see what they might be able to help you with things as well. Um, this is not something that one person, especially when you're new to this work, you should expect to be able to do on your own.
Let me add, Shino talked about the emails. One of the things that the ECC is working on in negotiation with uh, DOE is to try to get email address for all CEC members so that they don't have to use their personal email addresses or have to pay for email addresses. So, for instance, CC16, our email addresses is connected to our website, so we pay for them. I've been in communication with Face, trying to see the same emails that they're now allowing DPACs and presidents for PTAs to use, is to try to get that for all 1,300 CC members. So we'll keep you all posted on the update on that. My hope is to try to get this rectified so at least by January, we all could have external DOE email accounts so that we're not using our personal email accounts.
Thank you, Nikwan, and thank you for doing that work. I think that would be a really nice thing for CEC members to have. Um, and if there aren't any other questions here, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming, and I wish everyone a pleasant evening.